Good afternoon, Sue. Sue, can you hear me?
I can. I'm trying to figure out how to make you bigger. I've got you up in the corner of my screen. I may have to, but you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go out and come back in.
Okay.
Okay, so don't
Sure.
give up. Yeah, but now I can't even get out. There you are. Oh, good. How are you, John?
Fine. It takes time for the electrons to get all the way from Texas to
Yeah,
Boston.
of course. Of course, I understand. It also takes a while for the electrons to fire in my brain.
Well, you and I have the same issue.
I think frequently when I'm signing on of your children, do you think they would ever come back to do Bible study with us?
That would sure be great, wouldn't it?
And what do they say when you ask? You
I
can tell
have
them
never
Sue
asked.
asked. You can tell them that Sue asked, so it won't be you.
Well, and I've asked Paul and Gabrielle a number of different times. I said, when are you coming back? And of course, I get a lot of, they're always too busy. Well, I remember when I was busy too. I probably would not have been a reliable attendee like you and I.
Are they both still working?
Oh, yeah. Paul's only 54.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so he's still got a lot of work left.
Okay.
And it's going to be tougher for our kids' generation, retiring is going to be tougher.
Because of money issues?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. It's a question of um, inflation, and it's a question of, I mean, you stop and think just in the last 10 years how much things have gone up. I was looking at some graphs of what things cost in 2012 versus what
Yes.
they cost today.
Yes. Well, that's 13 years, yes.
Yeah,
And they're up astronomically, aren't they?
yeah. Our world has changed. We've been pretty blessed, actually, when you stop and think about the benign inflation we had for so many years. Yeah, there's been some ups and downs and what have you, but all through through the basic 90s and what have you, when we were, at the peak of our careers, we were in pretty good shape. And we also are lucky enough to be descendants of World War II and the Depression, so we know how to be frugal.
Right.
Whereas when you look at your children and I look at my children and I look at my grandkids, I don't think they understand frugal.
Well, they've heard the word, but they're not exactly sure what it means.
That's
I,
right.
I don't know if I have to tell you one quick story about my son and my grandson. My grandson just graduated from Boston College, so he was here nearby for 4 years, which
Oh
was lovely.
boy.
And his favorite food is Japanese food.
Hmm.
And so my son makes a reservation for his sister, who is a meals trust officer, and her husband and me. Anyway, there's six of us for dinner at this very plain Japanese restaurant.
Hmm.
It is $196 a person for 19 courses.
Whoa.
And the courses are very small.
Yes.
If you're at all familiar with Japanese food, it's
I,
not, it's a mouthful. Each course is a
yeah.
mouthful. And they are drinking $100 bottles of sake like it's going out of style. And I said, Peter, this is ridiculous. He said, Mom, I have the money and this is how I choose to spend it. For six of us, the bill had to be $2,500.
Oh, easy, easy. Well, I spent a lot of time in Japan, both in the Navy and when I was working. And I guarantee you the Japanese could not spend that kind of money to eat those kind of meals. And
Absolutely. Well, it's
It is.
ridiculous.
It's in, they do serve in small portions, and that's what when you go to Japan, you don't see any overweight people,
No, huh, that's
and
for
I'm sure
sure.
that's true today.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I was appalled and I told him, I
Yeah,
said, I think this is ridiculous. And the next night, my daughter, who is the trustee for Emil's education trust, took us out to dinner in Cambridge, and that was another $1,200.
yeah,
$1,200 for dinner?
We're talking about how we are the frugal generation and our children
Yeah,
don't know the meaning of the word.
yeah. I mean, seriously, if there's a restaurant that charges $1,200 for dinner,
Well, the worst part about it is the night before my youngest grandson graduated from Boston College in May, and his favorite food is Japanese food. And so we
mm,
went to a Japanese restaurant, six of us. It is $196 a person for 17 courses. And
wow.
my children are drinking $100 bottle sake like it's going out of style. So I said to John, um,
Yeah,
I said, Peter,
mhm,
this is ridiculous. And he said, Mom, I have the money and this is how I choose to spend it. What am I going to tell him? He's
yeah,
64 years old. I
yeah.
couldn't tell him anything when he was six, let alone when he's 64.
Yeah. That's like my daughter. She has no savings at all. It just goes out as fast as it
yeah.
comes in. Yeah,
That's what we were just
yeah.
commenting on is we've been really blessed. We're able to have a great retirement and all of this, but our
Mhm.
children and our children's children aren't going to have that same opportunity.
Probably
And I
not.
always
Yeah.
look back and thank my parents as much as I used to get upset over how frugal they were. They were
Mhm.
products of the Depression, products of
Yeah.
World War II, and all of that. And that's paid dividends. My sister and I talk about this every once in a while.
Mhm.
We really turned out to be pretty lucky.
Yeah.
And as bad as I think it's going to be for our children, I think it's going to be really awful for our grandchildren. I don't know how, for example, they'll ever buy a house.
I
Mm.
agree with you.
Yeah. The housing prices are ridiculous. Yeah.
I was
In fact, yeah. Go
I,
ahead.
I was watching a program. I believe it was on YouTube, and they were talking about this was in New Jersey about all the requirements they have building a house in New Jersey. They have to use the 2x6 studs in the wall instead of 2x4s. They have to have special windows, and some of these may be national requirements to thermally special thermal interest insulated windows. Every house has to be wired for EVs, and they went through a whole litany of things that you have to have in the house. Well, when
Yeah.
I bought my first house, I mean it was bare bones. and
Yeah.
and today, you add all of those things together, no wonder people can't afford to buy a house.
Yeah.
Yeah, the first house we bought when the children, actually, there were only two children at the time, a third one came along. Um, we bought a house for $35,000, and that was really extravagant.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. My parents built a house. I was about 11, I think, when we built our first house. $10,500.
Of course,
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
Greenville.
In Greenville. Yeah.
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 Yeah, well, our first house was in Seattle, Washington after I got out of the Navy, and the mortgage was, believe it or not, $195 a month, and I made less than $500 a month. And boy, I'll tell you what, when it came close to the end of the month, it was hamburger helper, mostly
Yeah.
helper.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I guess we're
Okay.
we're looking at Genesis, what chapter, Fred?
Yeah. Well, actually, we're just starting the story of Joseph now, which is chapter 37.
Have you heard from Rachel?
No, like I said, the last time I saw them was a few weeks ago. They came in for services one
Yeah.
Saturday morning. And again, her welding class is supposed to end at the end of this year. So
Okay.
hopefully she'll be rejoining us in
Right.
January. Yeah.
And Howard, I guess, is traveling.
Yeah, I didn't see him last week in services. I guess he's kind of in and out. Yeah, yeah. So,
Do you want me to
um,
start? Now Jacob was settled in the land where his father had sojourned, the land of Canaan. This
yeah.
then
I,
is
I
what,
would, what I would do is read the first 11 verses, 1 through 11.
okay. Now Jacob was settled in the land where his father had sojourned, the land of Canaan. This then is the line of Jacob. At 17 years of age, Joseph tended the flocks with his brothers and helper to the sons of his father's wives, Bilhah and Siphrah. And Joseph brought bad reports of them to his father. Now Israel loved Joseph best of all of his sons, for he was the child of his old age, and he made him an ornamental tunic. I assume that's the cloth of many colors.
Uh-huh,
And when
yeah.
his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him so that they could not speak a friendly word to him. Once Joseph had a dream in which he told his brothers and they hated him even more. He said to them, "Hear this dream which I have dreamed. We are binding shaves in the field when suddenly my shaves stood up and remained upright, when your shaves gathered around and bowed low to mine." His brother answered, "Do you mean to reign over us? Do you mean to rule over us?" And they hated him even more for his talk about his dream. He dreamed another dream and told it to his brothers. "Look, I have another dream. And this time the sun and the moon and the 11 stars were all bowing to me." And when he told it to his fathers and his father berated him. "What is this dream you have dreamed? Are we to come, I and your mother and your brothers, and bow low to you to the ground?" So his brothers were brought up with him, and his father kept the matter in mind.
So you start off with this is an obnoxious kid. I mean, first of all, he's a tattletale. He's bringing, evil reports of his brother back to his father. And then, these dreams. I mean, if they have these dreams, who would be stupid enough to tell this to his family? I'm going to rule over all of, he's
Especially to your older siblings.
yeah, I know. Even for a teenager, he's really, be over the limit here. Because, the thing is, though, he's Rachel's first child. And Rachel is Joseph's real true love. He never wanted to marry Leah or any of these other women. And so in a sense, this is really his firstborn. This is his firstborn child by Rachel. And
Yeah.
so even though Reuben, Leah's child is his actual firstborn, he really looks at Joseph, because if it were up to him, he would have only married Rachel anyway, and not Leah or any of the others. So he really is kind of a special kid. But the coat he made, nobody really knows what kind of coat it was. The Hebrew is ketonet pasim, and ketonet just means coat. But pasim only occurs once in the Bible here. And so nobody really has any idea what it is. And if you read different translations, you'll get coat of many colors, ornamented coat, embroidered coat, long sleeve coat, striped coat. People just don't know what that word means. So it's just kind of a guess as to what the coat was.
So, so that's just a word that in history got lost.
Yeah, well, there's several words like that in the Bible. There are three types of words in the Bible. There's a really common words like tree, house, stone, man, where
Hmm.
it's obvious what they mean. And then there are some uncommon words that will maybe occur a dozen times in the Bible. But then what they do is just get a concordance and you look at all the places it occurs in the Bible, and you can usually figure out from the context, what the word means. But then you have these words would only occur once in the entire Bible. And then it's just a
There's
guess.
nothing to benchmark
There's nothing
against.
to compare it to.
Yeah.
There's no other context to look at it in. So, what kind of coat this was, it's just sheer guesswork. I think the popular translation is the coat in many colors. That's the one that
Yeah.
seems to have taken hold, and people talk about that. Okay. And then, of course, the rest of it is from chapter from 12 through the end of the chapter, really.
Okay, I'll go ahead and read that. Now his brothers went to pasture their father's flock near Shechem, and Israel said to Joseph, are not your brothers pasturing the flock at Shechem? Come, I will send you to them. And he said to him, here I am. So he said to him, go now, see if it is well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring me word. So he sent him from the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. And a man found him wandering in the fields, and the man asked him, what are you seeking? I am seeking my brothers, he said. Tell me, please, where they are pasturing the flock. And the man said, they have gone away, for I heard them say, let's go to Dothan. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan. They saw him from afar, and before he came near to them, they conspired against him to kill him. They said to one another, here comes this dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then they will say that a fierce animal has devoured him, and we will see what will become of his dreams. But when Reuben heard it, he rescued him out of their hands, saying, let us not take his life. And Reuben said to them, shed no blood, throw him into this pit here in the wilderness, but do not lay a hand upon him, that he might rescue him out of their hand to restore him to his father. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the robe of many colors that he wore, and they took him and threw him into a pit. The pit was empty, there was no water in it. Then they sat down to eat, and looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels bearing gum balm and myrrh on their way to carrying it down to Egypt. Then Judah said to his brothers, what profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites. Let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother, our own flesh. And his brothers listened to him. Then Midianite traders passed by, and they drew Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. They took Joseph to Egypt. When Reuben returned to the pit and saw that Joseph was not there, he tore his clothes and returned to his brothers and said, the boy is gone, and I, where shall I go? They then they took Joseph's robe and slaughtered a goat and dipped it in the blood. And they sent the robe of many colors and brought it to their father and said, this we have found. Please identify whether it is your son's robe or not. And he identified it and said, it is my
Hmm.
son's robe. A fierce animal has devoured him. Joseph is without doubt torn to pieces. Then Jacob tore his garments and put sackcloth on his loins, and mourned for his son many days. All his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted and said, no, I shall go to Sheol and to my son mourning. Thus his father wept for him. Meanwhile, the Midianites had sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of the Pharaoh, the captain of the guard.
Yeah. So here, this is kind of typical of the Bible, which you seem to have are two different stories being kind of mixed together. First you have Reuben, the oldest brother, who decided he's going to save Joseph by getting him to throw him in a pit. And later on, when they've all gone, he can come back, pull him out of the pit, and bring him home. But in the meantime, you have Judah coming up with another idea. Let's sell him, and which is kind of ironic the way he puts it. Just don't kill him. After all, he is our brother, but it's okay to sell him.
Yeah.
Even though he's our brother. And then the Ishmaelites come by, and they're going to sell him to the Ishmaelites. But meanwhile, a bunch of Midianites come by and pull him out, and the Midianites sell him to the Ishmaelites. The story, it just doesn't all hold together. It's kind of got a lot of loose ends. Where was Reuben? Where was Reuben gone to, and where did he come back from? To find out that Joseph was gone. You really get the impression there are probably several oral traditions that are all mixed up, in this one story when they wrote it down. The other thing here is that, when Reuben first finds out that Joseph is missing, his reaction, he tears his clothes. And again, when Jacob gets the news, that Joseph is dead, or he thinks he's dead, he tears his clothes. This is typical of the biblical tradition on getting bad news of any kind of really bad news. As a sign of mourning, you tear an item of clothing. And it's still actually, this is the first time in the Bible that it's described, but it's still done. In Orthodox Jewish funerals, people will tear an item of clothing, often the lapel of a coat, just rip it, from the coat as a sign of mourning. Some of the more liberal denominations, Judaism, do it kind of symbolically. The family will wear black ribbons, and they'll make a cut in the black ribbon. It's sort of symbolically, rending the garments. But this story is really where the tradition starts. It's the first time they describe it. Um, the other thing they describe in verse 35, it says, all his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him. This is the first time we learned he had daughters.
Yeah.
Up to now, the story just talks about his sons. The only exception is Dinah, the one who gets raped, and her brothers avenge that by killing everybody in Shechem. But apparently he has daughters, which the Bible just doesn't bother to give us the names of because they're just girls, so they don't count. But he does have daughters. But then we learn for the first time over here.
When you
And
also wonder how many brothers there were involved.
Well,
They
we
weren't
know that there
directly.
were 11 besides Joseph, weren't there?
yeah, there were. In fact, there's an odd detail in here that doesn't make any sense. Right at the very beginning, when Joseph is describing his dreams, he says, the moon and the sun and 11 stars bow down to me. And his father says, are you really saying that I, and your mother and your 11 brothers are all going to bow down to you? Well, you think about it. Uh, Joseph's mother is not there anymore. She's died already. Rachel dies in childbirth with her second son, Benjamin. So she's no longer around. So it's kind of an odd detail to have in the story. Yeah. The other is in verse 35, when he refuses to be comforted, and he says, I'm going down to Sheol. And there's a lot of argument about what Sheol is. You know, um, there's a big argument about whether there's any indication in the Hebrew Bible of an afterlife or not. And Sheol is often used as an example. Some people believe that Sheol was like the Greek Hades, a place below the ground where people went when they died. The other opinion is, I think, which is the majority opinion, that Sheol is just a poetic name for the grave. It's just saying, I'm going to go down to my grave still mourning my son, which is probably what it does mean. The other interesting thing is I think we mentioned it last week, that Jacob and Is the names Jacob and Israel are used, back and forth in this story. So even though Jacob supposedly, left his old name behind when he wrestled with the angel or the man, now he's Israel. The text just goes on calling him Jacob most of the time. He's occasionally called Israel, but most of the time he's still called Jacob. Whoever wrote the rest of the stories about him didn't get the message, apparently. Then the odd thing is with the next chapter, with chapter 38, um, the story breaks off completely. They pause the story of Joseph, and the next chapter really is the story of Judah and Tamar, um, which is totally unrelated to that. They just inserted in here, and the story of Joseph doesn't pick up again until chapter 39. But chapter 38 is kind of interesting. Sue, you want to read that?
About the time Judah left his brothers and camped near a certain Abdulamite,
Abdullamite.
whose name
Yeah.
was Hiram. Then Judah saw the daughter of a certain Canaanite, whose name was Shu, and he married her and cohabited with her. She conceived and bore a son, and he named him Er. She conceived again and bore a son, and she named him Onah. Once
Oh
again, she
no.
bore a son, and he named him Shelah. He was at Shebzit when she bore him.
Yeah.
Judah got a wife for Er, his firstborn. Her name was Tamar. But Er's firstborn was displeasing to the Lord, and the Lord took his life. Then Judah said to Oman, join now with your brother's wife and do your duty by her as a brother-in-law and provide offspring for your brother. But Onan, knowing that the seed would not count as his, let it go to waste whenever he joined with his brother's wife, so as not to provide offspring for his brother. What he did was displeasing to the Lord, and he took his life also. Then Judah said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, stay a widow in your father's house until my son Shelah grows up, for he thought he too might die like his brothers. So Tamar went to live in her father's house. Keep going. A long time
Yeah.
afterward.
Unless you want to pass it off to John. It's a long chapter.
Yeah. Okay, John, would you pick up at 12?
Sure. In the
Sure.
course of time, the wife of Judah, Shoa's daughter, died. When Judah was comforted, he went up to Timnah to his sheep's bearers, he and his friend Hira, the Adulamite, and when Tamar was told, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep, she took off her widow garments and covered herself with a veil, wrapping herself up, and sat at the entrance of Enam, which is is on the road to Timnah. For she saw that Shelah was grown up, and she had not been given to him in marriage. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute, for she had covered her face. He turned to her at the roadside and said, come, let me come in to you, for he did not know that she was his daughter in law. She said, what will you give me, and that you may come into me? He answered, I will send you a young goat from the flock. And she said, if you give me a pledge until you send it. He said, what pledge shall I give you? She replied, your signet and your cord and your staff that is in your hand. So he gave them to her and went into her, and she conceived by him. Then she arose and went away, and taking off her veil, she put on her garments of her widowhood. When Judah sent the young goat by his friend, the Adulamite, to take back the pledge from the woman's hand, he did not find her, and he asked the man of the place, Where is the cult prostitute who
Mhm.
was at Enam on the roadside? And they said, no cult prostitute has been here. So he returned to Judah and said, I have not found her. Also, the men of the place said, no cult prostitute has been here. And Judah replied, let her keep the things as his own, or we shall be laughed at. You see, I sent this young goat, and you did not find her. About 3 months later, Judah was told, Tamar, your daughter in law, has been immoral. Moreover, she is pregnant by immorality. And Judah said, bring her out and let her be burned. As she was being brought out, she sent word to her father in law, by the man to whom these belong, I am pregnant. And she said, be please identify whose these are the signet and the cord and the staff. Then Judah identified them and said, she is more righteous than I, since I did not give her to my son Shelah, and he did not know her again. When the time of her labor came, there were twins in her womb, and when she was in labor, one put out a hand, and the midwife took and tied the scarlet thread on his hand, saying, this one came out first. But as he drew back his hand, behold, his brother came out, and she said, what a breach you have made for yourself. Therefore, his name was called Perez. Afterward, his brother came out with the scarlet thread on his hand, and his name was called Zerah.
So, what this story really is all about is what's called levirate marriage. You know, the tradition was, or the law really was, if a man died and left his widow without any children, if there were a brother or any other near relative, he was required to marry the woman, and then if they had a son, that son, would inherit. And the idea was, to keep land and keep this within the family. And the odd thing, though, when Judah marries, he marries a Canaanite woman. And this it really is a big deal. When Abraham is trying to find a wife for his son Isaac, he tells his servant, go back to my homeland, go back to Mesopotamia. I don't want my son marrying a Canaanite woman. And then the same thing happens with Jacob. The excuse that Rebecca gives Isaac for sending him away to his uncle Laban is, I don't want him staying in Canaan. He might marry a Canaanite woman. So apparently this was a big no-no, marrying a Canaanite woman, and Judah marries one, and apparently it's okay. Nobody says anything about it. But so Tamar it marries his oldest son, Er, and we don't know why. The Bible doesn't tell us why Er died. What he did that displeased God. So, but now she's a widow. Tamar, by the way, it's a beautiful name. It means a palm tree. Tamar is a palm tree.
Mm.
And so his second son, Onan, is now expected to marry her, but he decides not to have a child by her. And probably the reasoning was, there are two sons left. If he gets Tamar pregnant and she has a son, then the estate's going to be divided three ways among three sons. If Tamar doesn't have any children, then it's going to be divided among two sons. So this may have been basically just greed. He by not doing his duty and giving her a son, he's giving himself a bigger inheritance. When Judah finally dies, and of course God doesn't like that, so he gets sapped too. And so Judah has one son left, Selah, who's very young. Judah's probably figuring, this girl is bad luck. I've already given her two of my sons and they're gone. Do I want to risk my third son? So he decides to stall for time and says, he's too young to marry. tells Tamar, go home and wait. When he's older, we'll talk about marriage then. Because, normally, the next in line would be Sela to marry her. She still hasn't had any children by either one of her husbands. So, Sela's kind of on deck, to be the next husband. And so apparently what happens is time goes by, and Tamar finally realizes she's been put on the shelf, that she's never going to marry Sela. Her biologic clock is ticking, and she figures she's got to make something happen. And so she disguises herself and sits by the roadside, pretending to be a prostitute. And Judah passes by and decides to buy her services. And so when they get, and this, of course, you have to believe that Judah doesn't recognize his own daughter-in-law. He's been to two of her weddings, but he doesn't recognize her, even though she's wearing a veil. You think he'd recognize her voice, or at a certain point the veil must have come off. But when you think about it, it's kind of like a lot of Shakespeare's plays. How many of Shakespeare's plays have a plot where husbands don't recognize wives or parents don't recognize children if they're disguised, and you just have to go along with it. So you have to kind of suspend your skepticism and believe that Judah doesn't recognize his own daughter-in-law. But she tells him she doesn't take plastic, so this has got to be cash. All right. And he says he doesn't have any money. He'll give her a goat, which is a pretty valuable animal, but he doesn't have it right now. If she'll wait, when he goes home, he'll send her the goat, in payment. And she says, I want some kind of security for it. And so he gives her his signet and his cord and his staff, which is really a big deal because these are the symbols of his authority as head of as head of his tribe. The signet is basically it's a hollow cylinder with it with the design on the outside, so you can take it and roll it over wet clay, to make a image that way, or you can dip it in ink and roll it over a piece of parchment, and use it that way. And normally it was worn around the neck. That's what the cord was. The cylinder
Oh,
was worn around the neck, descended from the cord. And then, of course, the staff. Every tribe had a distinctive staff. The leader of a tribe owned the staff, and it was there was special engravings that identified which tribe it was from. And so Judah apparently doesn't believe in identity theft. I mean, he just gives her all this stuff, surety. And then, when his friend goes back to deliver the goat, later on, she's gone. And nobody ever knew who she was. And so Judah figures, well, we can't let the worry of this get out. It's going to make me look bad, that I'm supposedly in mourning for my wife and I was taking up with a prostitute. And so they decide just to let the whole matter drop. But then he finds out that Tamar is pregnant, and he assumes it's by somebody else. And so, the penalty for adultery, she's betrothed to Sela, and legally betrothal is the same thing as marriage in the sense that if you have a betrothed couple, even if they're not married yet, if either one of them has sex with someone else, it's considered adultery. And so she's an adulteress, for which the penalty is death. And what she does, she secretly sends the cord and the signet and the staff to Judah, saying, um, "Tell me if you know who these are." Of course, he knows very well who they are, and he then admits, she's been more righteous than I. She's done the right thing here. Um, the thing that I've always wondered about, it said that he had nothing to do with her after that. I don't know why he didn't marry her. I mean, this is really a pretty sharp woman when you think about it.
yeah.
You think, if I'd been Jude, I think I would have married her at that point. But she goes ahead and has the twins, and the parrots and the other one. It's an interesting story, though. So
Fred, why do you think this gets plunked right in the middle of the Joseph story?
I don't know, I guess they had to put it somewhere, and they just decided to put it here. It could have very well been put in before the previous chapter. You could have had the story about Judah even before the thing about Joseph. It could have been put in anywhere. We don't really. we don't really know the times involved in this. Was this before or after Joseph was sold into Egypt? By putting it there, we assume it's after, but you can't really know for sure. The rabbis of the Talmud took an interesting lesson from this. Tamar, even at the risk of her own life, didn't tell everybody that it's Judah who did this. She simply secretly sent these ID things to Judah, saying, "Do you know who these are?" She didn't want to embarrass him, and even risking her own life. And so there's a statement of the Talmud that someone should be willing to jump into a fiery furnace before they humiliate somebody else in public.
And this
That's the
whole
lesson they
story
took
is so
from it.
strange because not only should he have known her, she should have known him.
Oh, I
Well,
think
I'm sure.
she did.
Well, I think she did. Yeah,
Yeah, but I mean, from
she
the
did.
get-go, I mean, it was,
Oh, well, yeah, she definitely did. Yeah.
yeah.
She was going to have kids by somebody, and if it wasn't by Sela, Judah was fine too. What's harder to believe is that he didn't recognize her at all, even recognize her voice.
Well, and the numbers of people, it wasn't like going into, say, into a strange city and you see all these faces you've never seen before. I mean, it
Right.
wasn't,
Yeah.
the world wasn't
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
way.
You just sort of have to just suspend your disbelief and go, yes,
Yeah,
it obviously it's hard to believe. The same thing is, later on we're going to read when Joseph, is raised up to a high position in Egypt, and there's a famine, and his brothers have to come to him, to buy grain in Egypt, and they don't recognize him.
yeah,
It's been 20, I mean, like, granted, it's been 20 years. Joseph is now a mature man. He's not a teenager anymore. He's dressed as an Egyptian prince. He's speaking Egyptian and pretending not to understand their Hebrew. He's using an interpreter. But you figure with 11 brothers, at least one of them should look at him and think, I've seen that guy before.
yeah. I've met him someplace. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, for 11 of them not to recognize their own brother, it's that you get the same kind of thing. You just have to go with it.
yeah.
It's kind of it's not very usual. But anyway, the chapter 39, which is the last part of this of this parsha, picks up the story of Joseph again. So, if Sue, if you want to pick up with chapter 39.
When Joseph was taken down to Egypt, a certain Egyptian Potiphar, a courier of Pharaoh and his chief steward, brought him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he was a successful man. And he stayed in the house of his Egyptian master. And when his master saw that the Lord was with him and the Lord lent success to everything he undertook, he took a liking to Joseph. He made him his personal attendant and put him in charge of his household and all that he owned. And from the time that the Egyptian put him in the charge of his household and all that he owned, the Lord blessed his house for Joseph's sake, so that the blessing of the Lord
Yes.
was upon everything that he owned in the house and outside. He left all that he had in Joseph's hands, and with him he paid attention to nothing save the food that he ate. Now Joseph was well built and handsome. After a time, the master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph and said, Lie with me. But he refused. He said to his master's wife, Look, with me here, my master gives no thought to anything in this house, and all that he owns he has placed in my hands. He wields no more authority in this house than I, and has withheld nothing from me except yourself, since you were his wife. How could I then do this wicked thing and sin before God? And as much as she coaxed Joseph day after day, he did not yield to his she did he did not yield to her request to lie beside him and to be with her. On one day he came into the house to do his work. None of the household being there, she caught hold of him by his garment and said, Lie with me. But he left his garment in his hand and got away and fled. When she saw that he had left it in her hand and fled outside, she called to the servants and said, Look, he had brought to us a Hebrew to dally with us. This one came to lie with me, but I screamed loud. And when he heard me screaming at the top of my voice, he left his garment with me and got away and fled outside. She kept his garment beside her until the master came home. Then she told him the same story. The Hebrew slave who you brought into your house came to dally with me, but when I screamed at the top of my voice, he left his garment with me and fled outside. When the master heard the story, he told his wife, namely, thus and so your servant did to me. He was furious. So Joseph's master had him put in prison where the king's prisoners were confined. But even there, when he was in prison, the Lord was with Joseph and extended kindness to him and disposed the chief jailer favorably toward him. The chief jailer put in Joseph's charge all of the prisoners who were in the prison, and he was the one that was to carry out everything that was done there. The chief jailer did not supervise anything that was in Joseph's charge because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made successful.
Yeah. So Joseph, appears to be a charismatic guy. If, uh, everybody who comes in contact with him likes him. His master makes him chief steward of the house. His master's wife is hitting on him all the time. Even in prison, the warden, takes a liking to him right away and kind of makes him like really an assistant warden, kind of a trustee, in charge of the other prisoners. So he kind of leads a charmed life. Everything he every where he goes, he prospers. Everyone he comes in contact with, other than his brothers, of course, really like him. And
He was like David, beloved of God.
he
Yeah.
really was. Yeah, he's one of these really if he were in America today, he'd probably be president. He's a natural politician.
Well, and not only that, he was very smart, it appears.
Yeah, he
I
was.
mean,
Uh,
to rise up to rise up from being a slave to in charge of all of this person's wealth and land and everything.
yeah, chief steward of the house is really a responsible position.
Yeah,
And you're right. Yeah, for a slave who probably does not even speak the language. You assume he didn't even speak Egyptian.
yeah,
When he arrived there. And we don't know how long he was there before he went to prison. But most people assume it was probably at least a few years, maybe a couple of
yeah.
years or more. It would have taken that long, to raise up to the position that he was at. And now he's in prison, but again, in prison, he works his way up, to position there too.
But one of the things that's interesting to me here when he mentions when he's with when is the wife wants to lie with him, and he talks about doing something in the presence of God, the reference to God. Now the Egyptians didn't have the same God, so I was wondering he didn't forsake his God because
Oh
his
no,
God was
no, it's obviously his God
yeah.
who watches over him there. And then this section ends with chapter 40, which is Joseph's interpretation of the dreams in prison. If you want to read that one.
Yeah. So, listen, I have to leave to go to a gathering. Can we maybe break
Uh,
here and pick this up next week?
sure, yeah, we can just pick up with
As
chapter 40
unfortunately,
next
I've got
week.
to run, and this is
Yeah,
such a great story, and you do such a great job
yeah,
describing all of
This
the.
is one of the best stories in the Bible.
It
it
is.
is. Yeah, the story of Joseph really
It
is. Yeah,
really is.
it is. Yeah. Okay, let's
Would
knock
it be
off here.
okay? Yeah, I'm
Yeah, we'll
sorry,
we'll
but
come back.
we've got to
Eh,
leave here in about 3 minutes, and this
Okay,
looks like it might be a good break place for
okay,
me.
okay. Chapter 40 we start next week.
Okay. Thank
Okay.
you all. Have a
Okay,
good
Thank you.
rest
Good
of the
night,
week.
everybody.
okay.
Night.
Good night.